Hey, how's it going? Ben here. Great to see you again. Thanks for tuning in. In this video, I'm going to talk about 5 of the biggest surprises I've found as an English teacher living abroad. So moving abroad and starting a new career as an English teacher is always going to bring plenty of challenges and surprises. To save you some surprises, I wanted to share with you 5 common misconceptions and 5 surprising things that I've found working abroad here in Thailand as an English teacher. If you teach abroad and you think I've missed anything off this list, please let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you and love to hear your experiences. Number 1 is working hours. So one of the biggest surprises for me when I started work here in Thailand was actually the working hours. My first job in a school here in Thailand, I was working 7:30 in the morning until 5 p.m. in the evening. And I wasn't allowed to leave the school premise within that time. So I had to stay in school for 9.5 hours, Monday to Friday. That was a massive amount of time that I had to stay in the school that I wasn't expecting. That was 9.5 hours every day I had to be in and on the school premise. And some days I was only teaching for 3 hours. So I'd have 3 hours in the classroom, and the rest of the day, which I think is 6.5 hours, I had to stay in the school premise. I did have an office, so I would spend most of that remaining time sat at the desk in my office. It wasn't too bad. The office had air conditioning and Wi-Fi, and I took my laptop in, and you could fill that time. And towards the end of my experience at that school, I was actually filling that time with quite productive things. So I was taking classes online. I was studying. So after I'd adjusted and started studying online, it wasn't too bad, but at first it was completely unbearable having to sit in the office for that long. On top of the 9.5 hours I mentioned of regular school time, you may also find your working hours extended by things like gate duty. So it's pretty common for teachers to have to take part in gate duty. For me, this meant once a week I had to get into school 15 minutes early and leave 15 minutes later once a week. And this is to greet the students in the morning and say goodbye in the evenings. So yeah, that's quite a common practice here in Thailand for the teachers to stand at the gate, and it kind of involves you bowing to the students when they come and saying good morning, and when they're leaving saying goodbye, which is something I wasn't really expecting. And it sounds like a small thing, 15 minutes in the morning, but I think you'll find it when you have to wake up 15 minutes earlier, it seems like a massive deal in the morning. You'll probably also find that you have maybe 1 staff meeting per month. You may have to come in at the weekends for things like sports day and report day. You may also have to do other things like training and go to seminars, and this all adds to your already quite large amount of hours per week. This schedule is quite the shock to most of us new teachers who come to Thailand, because we've imagined finishing work at 3 and running down to the beach and relaxing for the rest of the evening. Teaching English in Thailand is advertised with pictures of beaches and coconuts, but really it should be advertised with pictures of workbooks, office chairs and fluorescent lighting. So when it comes to traveling, which is one of the main reasons most people come to Thailand and start a teaching position, bear in mind that working full-time as an English teacher won't actually leave you that much time at the weekends to travel. Number 2 on the list is uniforms. Uniforms do vary massively from school to school, so this may or may not apply to you. At my most recent school where I work, I'm actually quite lucky. The dress code is pretty simple and is essentially sort of business casual. What I mean by that is I can wear a polo shirt, any colour of my choosing, and dress trousers and dress shoes, which is way more comfortable and way more easily manageable than my first employer. Let me read to you now my weekly dress code from the school where I first worked, which is a very strict dress code, but one you may find yourself adhering to if you come to teach in Thailand. So on Monday I had to wear Thai dress, and that was a traditional Thai shirt with my regular trousers and shoes. On Tuesday and Wednesday were long sleeve light blue shirt with the school blue tie. So yeah, my school had their own ties that we had to wear. On Thursday I had to wear a long sleeve white shirt with the red school tie. And on Friday was any colour long sleeve shirt and any colour tie. So I was allowed to wear my own tie and any colour long sleeve shirt to a certain extent. But sometimes it was also sportswear on Friday, which was much better, which was a school polo shirt with tracksuit bottoms and trainers. And that wasn't the only polo shirt I had. We had probably around 4 or 5 polo shirts per year for different events that we would have to wear for one or 2 months on the Friday sometimes. Or we'd have different coloured polos for different activities. We would have a grey one to wear when we were kind of doing office work and weren't teaching. We would have many different colours depending on the sports team you would put on when in the run up to sports day. I'm trying to think, we had tons. We had one made for Valentine's Day one year, which had a pink polo shirt with a big love heart and the school's name printed on it. It was very dashing. And I even had a school suit made, so I had to pay half for a school suit, which was like a blue jacket and trousers with the school sort of logo stitched on the pocket. And we would have to wear a full suit with a long sleeve jacket and trousers on certain days. Which, as you can imagine, for someone moving from a colder country like Northern Europe, like me, to Thailand, wearing long sleeves and a tie every day in the office and in the classroom and just walking around school was extremely hot and pretty uncomfortable. Not to mention the days when we had to wear a full suit, and we would often have to stand and get school pictures outside in the middle of the day in the beating hot Thai sun to pose for pictures dressed in a school suit, long sleeve shirt, tie, dress trousers, dress shoes. These extreme dress codes are probably what you're not expecting. When I was packing to move to Thailand, I did go shopping for some uniform, for some school uniform, and I bought short sleeve shirts and trousers thinking that would be fine. That was not the case, especially not at my first school. Even at my new school with a more relaxed dress code, I still have to wear certain colours on certain days and still have school polo shirts printed for different occasions that I have to wear. There is a silver lining to that extreme dress code, which would be the school football shirts. So at my first school, there was a teacher's football team, which I managed to get on. And I do have a collection of different football shirts that were made for each year. Were pretty good with the school logo and my name printed on the back. So there are silver linings. Number 3 is students. So a surprisingly common misconception about new English teachers is the idea that the students in Asia will be very different from the monsters you went to school with. You'll be imagining sort of young, Buddhist, very pleasant, small children meditating and being silent in the classroom. This isn't true. Unfortunately, don't be surprised if you fly halfway around the world and find yourself teaching in a classroom that reminds you a lot of your primary or secondary school English class. What I mean to say is that kids are kids, and some days they'll be good and some days they might not be. If you're teaching older kids, they'll have days when they're fighting and bickering. They'll have days when they've broken up with their girlfriends or boyfriends. If you're teaching younger kids, some days you'll have days where they have so much energy you have to stop your class, get them all to stand up and do stretches, or think of some game where they can run about and move about just to expel some of that energy that they have, or you won't be able to get through the work you had planned. It's a surprisingly common misconception. I've heard it off a number of different teachers who were expecting very different students to what they had at home and found themselves with the very same students they would be teaching if they stayed in their home country, which really isn't that surprising when you think about it a little bit. However, a very pleasant surprise you will probably find is actually the level of English that the students can communicate with you. I teach students as young as 5 years old, younger sometimes, who can actually have conversations in English, and it'll blow your mind, especially if you're from a country like I am, where second languages aren't really learned or taught. I don't think you'll be expecting to be able to communicate and build real relationships with your students, and that is a very pleasant surprise. So yes, sorry to shatter that illusion that you may have that you'll be teaching a classroom filled with mini monks. The trade-off, however, is a classroom full of potentially capable English speakers who you can actually relate to because they remind you of yourself. And you should be able to grow a meaningful connection with these students as they're learning English from you. Number 4 is workload. I previously mentioned the working hours will probably be surprisingly large. What you may also find surprisingly large is the actual workload of working in a school. as an English teacher in Thailand. Most likely you'll be teaching 3 to 5 hours per day, and you may find yourself having up to 5 different classes that you're splitting your time, your teaching time between. In those classes you may have up to 50 students. Don't be surprised if you find yourself in your office hours not relaxing and watching movies, but instead writing reports, writing exams, writing reviews, grading, marking workbooks. Adding to the workload, you will probably also find that you have to write exams for your students. So that means writing an exam for every class you have, at least twice a year, but more likely 4 times a year. So at the end of each term and halfway through each term for their midterm exams. When you're writing an exam, you're responsible for creating the exam, writing the exam. You're usually responsible for giving the exam in the classroom and then also grading the exam. When it comes to added responsibilities, the sky really is the limit, I'm afraid to tell you. Like I mentioned before, you will probably find you have gate duty. You may have to do assemblies. It's very common that you'll have to run assemblies at least once a week, where you have to plan and present an assembly for all your students and possibly the whole school, which can be a bit of a challenge, especially for certain people. You may find you have to come in at the weekend and run an English camp. You may be responsible for creating a Christmas display. You may have to run a stall, playing games, selling cakes, raising funds. The list really goes on and on for added responsibility and added workload you may find when you're actually at a school teaching. One big thing in Thailand is regional competitions of English proficiency. So you may find that, well, you will find, I imagine, that your school and students will be taking part in regional competitions to test English. They'll have spelling bee competitions, reading competitions, storytelling competitions. And as an English teacher, you'll be preparing students for these competitions, and you will also probably be a judge at the actual competition at the lower levels, which would be at your school or at one of the local schools. These competitions are very important. If the student wins like the whole regional competition, they go up in stages, there's different levels. They can win prizes like scholarships to university. So the students take it very importantly, so do the schools, so do the parents. So yeah, that could be a big added thing to your workload you might find. Number 5 is paperwork. Thailand and Thai culture is perceived around the world as a very relaxed culture and country. And this is kind of true. What may surprise you is the amount of paperwork that needs to do in daily life while you're living here in Thailand. I was very surprised by this. And I would say it's one of the most memorable things about being in Thailand is the amount of paperwork. This is especially true when you're working in a school. So you will need to write monthly lesson plans and reports for your students. So this will be like an A4 sheet of what you've been doing, how it went for each class. So that could be up to 5 pages of A4 paper of written work about what you did, how it went, and what were the results. So you would have to print off and submit monthly. One thing that you're probably expecting is having to make worksheets. So yeah, that's very common in most schools, where you would make worksheets for your students to supplement the workbooks, and you'll probably definitely need to do this. What may surprise you is the process of getting worksheets printed. At the first school I worked at, this was an absolute ordeal. So first off, I had to create the worksheets and print them. I then had to fill in a photocopying permission slip, which was an A4 sheet of paper. I had to fill in how many I wanted. I had to sign it. I then had to hand my paper photocopying worksheets that I wanted photocopying and the permission slip to a teacher who checked them. She would then sign them. I then had to get them to another teacher and leave them while they checked them and signed them. That paperclip bunch of worksheets and permission slips was then sent back to me. I then had to go to a room with a guy who did the photocopying, hand in the forms, hand in the worksheets I wanted photocopying. He would then check them. At any point in any of these checks, if there was any problems, it would all have to be cancelled, and then maybe next week the photocopying would be done and I could go and collect it. As I mentioned, you'll be writing exams, so you'll have to write your exams, print enough exams for all your students. You will then collect those exams, score those exams. It's a mountain of paperwork involved in just the exams. You will then have to write reports for your students, probably, where you have to write score sheets and hand out pieces of paper to those students with those scores on. So there's a mountain of paperwork working in the Thai school. I also mentioned that at my first school I wasn't allowed to leave the premise even on my lunch hour. If I did have a legitimate reason to leave the school, I had to again get a permission slip, fill it in, get it signed by a superior, hand it in, get it stamped, and then I would, on the day, so I had to do that the day before, and then when I needed to leave the school to go to immigration or the doctors or wherever, I had to go to an office, collect the paper, go to the gate, give the paper to someone who give me half the paper back, and yeah, again, just another example of the ungodly amount of paperwork you'll probably find yourself having to do working in a school abroad, potentially. On top of that, just living abroad has a massive amount of paperwork that comes with it. This is true for any country, but when you're applying for your visa, you'll find yourself going with a whole folder full of paper. And if one of these pieces of paper is incorrect or you're missing one, you'll have to go back, get a new piece of paper. You'll have a TM30 maybe, which is a proof of residency where you're living. That may be a folded up piece of paper stapled in your passport. You probably have an arrival card stapled in your passport. You'll maybe have a work permit, and you'd have to have a folder full of papers and forms to apply for the work permit. So yeah, as you can imagine, there is a lot of paperwork involved in getting a visa and a work permit, but there's also a ton of paperwork involved in applying for photocopying, leaving the school, creating worksheets, and all of that kind of stuff. So that is one of the more lasting impressions I have of working in a Thai school, actually, is the amount of paperwork, which you may find surprising, like I did. So that concludes my 5 most surprising things I found about working as an English teacher abroad. If you like this video, please hit the like button. I greatly appreciate it. If you think I missed anything off the list, please leave it in the comment section below and let me know what are the most surprising things you found about living or working abroad. If you would like to go and live abroad and work abroad, potentially as an English teacher, then consider subscribing to this channel, because it is something I do and something I talk about quite a lot on this channel. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope to see you again. Goodbye.